good. I'm good.
Good. Yeah. How's it going? You got to preach on Sunday.
Yeah, that was. It's always there's quite a bit of weight when you get behind the pulpit a little bit,
Yeah.
as it said. So that was fun. I don't get to do that very often, or haven't lately. But when we first started the church, I did it
Did you?
a lot more often.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard you preach. I mean, I got to, we were at home, so I got to stream it. But
Yeah. So that's it's a fun part. It's kind of an interesting thing. I got to. My dad jokes that I did my first sermon at our home church when I was 12. So I got to do a Sunday morning service at a big kind of Baptist church in Plano, and that was kind of my first foray into that.
How old do you say?
I was like 12 years old.
12.
Yeah.
How'd that feel?
It was daunting because I was giving my perspective on tithing. And so it was an interesting kind of deal where I was like, I don't have any money of my own, so what does tithing look like to a middle school kid? And that's kind of what it was. And then so just over the years, I just kind of gotten to do that. And so, but Terrell had asked me to do that this past Sunday because I think he was in Oregon golfing with one of his buddies. I was supposed to be on that trip, but he said if I would, I couldn't do it, and then he just asked if I could do it or preach that Sunday. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I feel for Terrell because it is an absolute daunting task.
Oh, I know the weight of like carrying a church. I don't know because I've never done that. But no, I get it. So what was your 12-year-old perspective on tithing?
Oh, really, it was for me. It was just you've got to focus on giving your time because as a 12-year-old, I mean, for my situation, like I didn't have any money. All my money that I was given was my parents, and so from my perspective, I was like, I can't really tithe financially in the traditional sense, and I didn't have a job at that point either. Because I wasn't allowed to work at most places because of the Texas law at 15. Even though as soon as I turned 15, I started working somewhere. I was like, watch out for the cord here.
Oh, you're fine.
And so, but that was really the gist of it. I was like, I can give up my time, and so I can serve in kids or do something like that. Because oftentimes, like the church that I grew up in was First Baptist Plano, so a big Southern Baptist church. And so you had, a pretty good population gap. You had a bunch of people that were super old, and then you had all the young families, and there wasn't a whole lot in the middle. And so they always struggled with volunteers, and so it was always the kind of middle school kids that were serving in kids and things of that nature. So that was always really interesting. And so that was just kind of my perspective. Like if you guys would just serve, that would be even great. That's kind of like a tithing to the Lord. And the passage was like, I remember now that I look back, I'm like, man, I used that scripture out of context. The scripture in Corinthians where it talks about, the hand can't do without the arm, the ear can't do without the eye. And so I took that as like, and we need all of us to do the thing, right? But that was kind of interesting. I was like, it's a little bit out of context, but it kind of works. But as a 12-year-old, I was like, I really wasn't worried about the context of the scripture. But that's kind of where it was. So it was fun. I still remember, because we had the full-on choir behind you. I mean, it was a huge church, and I mean, it was surreal doing that. But my dad's a really good speaker. He's a corporate executive, and so he's retired now. But he traveled all over the place speaking, and so I got to watch him growing up speaking. And then I remember him teaching me before that first sermon, like, here's how you prepare for it. So it was a really neat experience with my dad. But he's a very gifted speaker, and so I get basically all of that from him because I got to watch him growing up, if that makes sense.
So anyway, why don't you, Josh, introduce yourself
Sure.
for the podcast?
Sure. My name's Josh Evans, obviously, and so I live in Nacogdoches. Been here for 14 years. I work for Lone Star Feed is what everybody knows us as. It's really Texas Farm Products Company. I'm the vice president of operations there, so I'm over all of our manufacturing facilities. So I work for my father-in-law. My father-in-law started the business in 1930, and so when I married Emily, I had no intention on coming back here. But we ended up here through a series of circumstances that really kind of changed our life about 14 years ago and ended up brought us back here. And so, but yeah, we've been involved at church or Mosaic since the very beginning. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. That's kind of just in short. Unless, what else do you want to know?
No, that's cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, most of the people so far who've been on here have been known through Mosaic.
Okay.
So we found it to be it's my mom's church, so that's how we got introduced to it. And then
I gotcha.
she's been going there since I think 2017,
Okay.
2018.
Yeah.
So back in the school era.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
let's see, where do we want to go? How long have you been a Christian?
Um, let's see. I mean, I've been. It's kind of a funny question to answer. So I tell it this way. I grew up in the church. My sister, we moved around a lot as kids, so we moved every 2 years because of my dad's job. And so we've been in places all over the place. So we lived in Marfa, Texas, which is way West Texas, in the middle of nowhere. Cedar Hill, Oak Cliff. I mean, we've Tulsa, Oklahoma, Corpus Christi. I mean, just kind of all over the place. And the reason I say that is my sister got baptized when she was like 5 or 6 or 7, and so and I really just got baptized because she did. And so,
Okay.
like, I understood it, but I went to the front, like you do in the Baptist church, and then the pastor prays for you, and then, like, a week later, you get baptized in the big baptismal. Um, and so, like, just as a kid, like, I understood, like, through all, like, the Sunday school. My parents were really involved in our church growing up. And so I understood that, but I wouldn't say I really understood what I was doing till almost high school. Um, and then that's even kind of funny to me too. Like I had just like an interesting faith through middle school and high school, and then college. You know, was the theoretical Christian basically, but really it was not an impactful part of my life through college, even early adulthood, when we got married, and really, I would say my walk with the Lord really began when we came to Nacogdoches 14 years ago.
Okay, what do you mean by theoretical Christian?
Meaning that I understood head knowledge of who God was, what Jesus did, but like when we talk about at church, like we want a relationship with Him now, and we interact with Him daily. That's what I mean. Like it was all head knowledge. I knew all the scriptures, but as far as interacting with Him on a daily basis that was not it. He wasn't infiltrating every part of my life. It was more of a moralistic approach. Like, hey, I'm going to do the things that I'm supposed to do from an appearance standpoint, but internally, I was a wreck. From anxiety to one of the things I still fight is like I really care about what people think of me, and so like the praise of man is what I call that. And so that's one of the things that throughout my life I've always had to fight, and I still fight today, of course. Um, but it had such a bigger impact on me earlier on in my life, more so than it does now. Because I think part of walking with the Lord is you realize those things that you either have hooked onto you, or you grab onto, or you find actually comfort in. That's what I call it idolatry. Is like you've taken comfort in something other than God Himself.
You mean like coping mechanisms?
Yeah, coping mechanisms. Yeah,
Okay.
and that was so if I could get the praise of man, I was good. Life was good. But as soon as I was not thought right of, or messed up, or just embarrassed in public, man, that wrecked me.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
Well, in the praise of man, it's fleeting too.
exactly. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very temporary. So it's an interesting thing, but that's what I mean. Like my walk with the Lord has been kind of a transitional time. But I would say 14 years ago, when I moved here and I met Garth, he introduced me to a God that really I'd never known. And that really kind of changed the trajectory of my life.
So how did that develop? Going from like the ideal Christian, or not ideal? How do you say it?
The theoretical Christian.
Theoretical Christian to where you are now.
Yeah. So when we moved in 2010 here, what had preceded that is, me and my wife got married right out of college. We were babies. She was 22, I was 21. We go right into the corporate rat race. She was a brilliant financial consultant for Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies. So my wife is a brilliant, brilliant finance mind. And then I went to work for a big global distribution company. And so we did the rat race, deal like my dad did. You just move up the corporate ladder. And so, anyways, we moved to Dallas, and then we moved to San Antonio, and then I had some health issues. Essentially, I had to go into emergency surgery, and then I was bedridden for 6 weeks at home.
Fun.
It was not fun, but it was a really trying time for me. But it was the first time in my life that I was forced to stop. I was working 80 hours a week at the corporate office because that's just what you did. That's the rat race. Like you had to climb the corporate ladder, and I was doing great at it, but I was just crippled inside. Um, and yeah, I was basically in our like my after surgery. I spent a couple days in the hospital, and then when I came home, like my wife had to set up a bed for me. Like I had a catheter. I really couldn't get up. So it was really kind of a raw deal.
Would you say you're one of those kind of people who does everything for themselves?
Yes.
And like you're not going to ask for help, not
No.
gonna.
No. I
So
I hate asking for help.
and then you're entirely dependent
Yeah.
on others.
Like I'm really dependent on like even my wife having to like wipe my rear and go to the restroom. Like it was. I was like, man, I'm completely helpless here.
Mm.
Um,
Well, I hope you have a good relationship.
we do.
Yeah.
We have a very close and intimate relationship
Yeah.
now. But anyway, so I mean, during that 6 weeks, like I was like, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? Like, surely there's more to life than this. Um, and then we'd come home to Nacogdoches to see our parents, and for the first time, I felt like I heard the Lord speak in my mind and say, "You're leaving your home." Um, and I was like, "That's so random." Like I never thought about going back to Nacogdoches. That's not in my plan. Because my plan was we were in San Antonio at the time. I was about to get offered a job at our corporate office in Virginia, and I was kind of moving up that track. And so, and then I look at Emily, I was like, this is what I heard. And she's like, I feel the same thing. And we had not talked about that. Never in the world had thought about moving back to Nacogdoches. Um, and so we talked about it, and then we said, I think this is what the Lord's telling us to do. And that was really the first time like we quit both of our jobs. Um, we both were very successful in our career. There was really nothing for us back in Nacogdoches that we knew of. And so we called our parents and said, hey, we're going to move back to Nacogdoches. And I told her dad, I was like, look, you don't need to do anything for a job with me. I've got plenty of skill sets. I'll find something to do here. And he said, well, I've got an operations manager job opening. I just opened it 2 weeks ago, and I'd like you to consider coming to work for me. And I was like, okay. And so that's what I did for work. I was an operations guy. And that was kind of daunting to think about. One, moving back to Nacogdoches. Two, working for your father-in-law.
Sure.
My father-in-law is a great, great man. But I had some hesitation. I was like, man, I had a really good relationship with him, and I was really scared about working and then jeopardizing that relationship. Um, and so, but anyways, I thought about it for a couple weeks, and I decided to come on.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, before we moved back, um, Emily told me, it's like, I know I know who one of your good friends is going to be. And I was like, who's that? She's like, Garth Hens. And I was like, don't know the guy or anything. And so I meet Garth, and Garth being Garth, he's like, right
Yeah.
on, trying to meet you. And so we ended up being good friends. And anyways, we started working out together, spending a lot of time together. And that's when he kind of started. He was probably about 3 years ahead of me with his journey of like hearing the Lord's voice, all these things. And so I remember he just loving on me for 2 years. And then inevitably hardship hit. And we're Subway eating. We kind of had like a weekly lunch routine, and we were sitting at Subway eating. And he said, "Hey, I got something for you." I was like, "What is it?" And so he pulls out this letter. He's like, "I wrote this letter, and just take it for what it's worth." And it basically, he said, "I think I received this from the Lord for you." And I was like, "Okay," and that was totally foreign language to me. But probably a year ago, we had been playing golf, and he just unloaded on me. It's like, here's what the Lord's been teaching me. And I was like, you're absolutely crazy, but I like you. And so I'm going to keep hanging around with you, but I do not understand all of what you're talking about. Like that's not my experience in life in the Lord. Actually, my upbringing was like, you're the crazy charismatic that I was told to stay away from.
Mm.
Um,
Baptist, you said Baptist, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I was a traditional Southern Baptist, and I mean, if you raised your hands during worship, I mean, it was like
yeah.
blasphemy. Like you are taking glory away from the Lord and onto yourself.
Mm. Like just like during praise and worship
Uh huh.
service, or
Oh yeah,
oh really?
yeah. It was that was very taboo back in the day.
Mm.
But so like, and then like when we started, we went to Grace Bible Church because my father in law is an elder there. So Emily grew up at Grace Bible. Um, and so, like, I even walked in and saw Garth, and he was the only guy raising his hands and praise and worship in Grace Bible in the morning. And I was like, okay, like it. But I admired him because I'm like, man, he doesn't care a rip about what people think. I was like, I want like that was compelling to me. I was like, Jesus is compelling enough to him that he doesn't care, and that was very compelling to me because it was the first time I had seen a put together man that owned his own business. Like most of the charismatic Christians that I knew, like their life was a wreck, and so he was the first person like kind of buttoned up kind of guy that
Mm-hmm.
was a business guy, but then you saw him in church, and I'm like, okay, he's got a compelling faith that he just doesn't care. He's going to do whatever that takes to do this.
Yeah.
And so that was compelling to me. But, anyways, back to the story. When he opened this note, I read it, and it was legitimately everything that I had been experiencing over the last 30 days. Like, specifically, verbatim. There was no way that he could have known any of those
Wow.
details. And he just began to unpack that for me. And then he said, here's what I think the Lord is trying to tell you to do with this. Um, and he told me afterwards, he's like, I was real nervous about giving it to you because I knew it could possibly end our friendship. Because I mean, it was very poignant. I mean, there were some, I would call them sin issues in there, that I was like, oh, I'm harboring a lot of anger and discontent. And so I mean, I was like, okay. And it's kind of that point, like, where you like, either God really does this or I have to totally chalk this up to like million and one chances. And I was like, there's just
Pure coincidence.
pure coincidence. I'm like, there's just no way.
Either that or Garth is highly perceptive.
Yeah, yeah. And I was like, like the details were so specific. I was like, there's no way he could know this. I mean, like names, dates. I mean, just crazy stuff.
Wow.
And I still have this letter. I mean, I go back to it.
Yeah, I don't know how you wouldn't keep that.
Yeah, I mean,
Frame it or something.
oh
Hide
yeah,
it. Hide it in a drawer.
oh yeah. I mean, I go back to it often in times of trouble. It's a reminder of the Lord's faithfulness to me. Um, and so that's kind of where it started. And so I just started hanging around doing morning prayer with them. We started doing men's prayer 10 years ago. It's been a decade now, Saturday mornings. And so I just started doing with them for years, and growing in really is, learning to listen for the Lord's voice and understanding that he speaks. Um, and then that's kind of where we jumped off into the gifts of the Spirit. Like that's kind of where that journey began for me, which was totally outside of my paradigm. I didn't, the prophetic giftings, the gifts of healing, seeing those things, um, that was super taboo for me growing up. Holy Spirit was the crazy uncle. We didn't talk about him at church. And so, but I began to experience things and see things. I'm like, either he does this or he doesn't. It was kind of that point for me. It's like, okay, either he does this, and I've seen people get healed, and then ultimately, a lot of part of my story, that I shared it this Sunday, was that I experienced physical healing for myself, in a very dramatic way, and so
That's something I wanted to talk about.
yeah.
If you want to talk about
Oh,
it.
sure, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm totally open to anything. And so that was kind of that's when kind of the rubber met the road for me. And that's where the praise of man had to die, because everybody was telling me, be careful, these things don't exist, or they're not good, or they cause
Which things specifically?
the gifts of the spirits.
Okay.
So like healing, the prophetic
But
giftings,
they're in the Bible.
they are in the Bible. And I think, I've got my views gotten a lot softer now. I was like super passionate and like I would have arguments with people. And I've understood that that's not the way to convince people.
Yeah, no.
And so I'm a little bit softer now, but
A lot of people they have to be convicted themselves, or God has to show them. Like
mhm,
we can't force it on anyone.
no,
It never works.
no,
You're just going to drive them away.
right. And so that's what I mean, like my transition from theoretical to a physical manifestation of a relationship with God.
Hmm.
Like I saw Him break in to my life several times, and then I've gotten to witness, praying for people and seeing them healed in the moment. And I'm like, okay, like I can't deny this anymore. Like denying would be saying that, God, I've seen you do this, and I'm going to reject everything that I've seen you do. It's kind of like you if you go the other way, you you're trading something, and you're going to be absolutely miserable because he can do this,
Mm.
but I'm going to choose to reject it out of either the fear of praise of people or because you're not compelling enough to follow. And that's kind of where that transition
What do
method.
you think the desire for praise that you were talking about
Mm,
conflicted with like the not wanting to be rejected by people?
yeah. Like I said, my dad was a very like successful business person,
Mm.
widely esteemed. I mean, it's still my hero. I mean, I look up to him and I still call him. He gives me great advice in multiple areas of my life, not just business. And so, like, there was prestige with that. Like my dad, they sent him to go to Harvard, to do like his MBA. So like all of this prestigious things and accolades he achieved. I have great honor of being Bruce Evans's son. Like that's a big deal to me. I hold that very dearly.
Mm.
But that got morphed to like I've got to achieve the same prestige as my dad, and even in Nacogdoches because who my wife is. I mean, they've been here. My wife's family's been here since 1930,
Okay.
and so well-known family. And I always wanted to represent them well. Um, and so that was always a part of like, I want to be seen well. I want to be seen rightly. I don't want to embarrass that family. And so that was always part of like, keep it straight. Don't get too on either side of the ditch here.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where that went.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah,
Cool.
if you want to talk about my experience with healing and things of that nature from Sunday.
I think, yeah, I guess like where that like anxiety started, like where do you think that came from, and then how the method of overcoming? Because like, I mean, it's something that I've been working on for the last 6 months personally. Like I can relate to that idea of like desiring the praise of men, wanting to be wanted,
Sure.
and I know a certain amount of that. I'm a pastor's son,
Yeah.
and so when you're a pastor's son, like there's a reason pastors' kids go off the rails,
Yeah.
and it's because the congregation is oftentimes gets far more attention than the children do,
Right.
and so you feel neglected.
Right.
So I can relate to that a lot where like my desire is to be wanted. I can even see that with like the playground build that we did where like you put a certain amount of effort in because you want to be wanted, you want to be needed.
Sure.
So I can relate to a lot of that
Yeah.
feeling of just like general anxiety.
Hmm.
And then you also my tendency is to self isolate in order to avoid those feelings of let's say distressful feelings of being neglected or not feeling like I'm being enough attention is being paid toward me.
Sure.
Even though like I mean to make it personal, like even in a church setting when you show up on Sunday and everyone's doing their thing, because I show up and set up cameras and everything, and nobody's really talking to you, and then you start to feel a little neglected,
Right.
but it's like everyone has their own job right now. It's entirely internal.
Hmm.
It's not personal from anyone,
Yeah.
and you got to kind of fight those feelings and push them away. Now I wouldn't say I've experienced like a miraculous healing thing
Yeah.
with that anxiety. It's something I've been working through. There's a guy, Tim Fletcher.
Hmm.
He's Canadian Christian, but he does a lot of work on complex trauma.
Sure.
So he has a bunch of YouTube videos where he does like a talk every Friday night
Yeah.
about complex trauma. But he's not like pray it away. He's like actually look back into your background and figure out why you came to have these feelings.
Sure. Yeah.
So he's been like a super resourceful tool for me. But if you talk about your experience and where you think that anxiety came from, and then how you overcame.
Sure. So a lot of that didn't creep up until um, really a couple years after I got here. So when I got here, my job was I was the operations manager. And so what that entailed is I had a mentor.
But what were you doing before?
So I was an operations manager in San Antonio, and my job was to basically run. So we were an industrial supply house. So when people would, or cities or big municipalities would retrofit either their wastewater treatment plant, their water system, we were the company that supplied all the building materials. We did some of the engineering behind it. We were basically, when a contractor came to us, like, hey, I've got this project. And so I started off as a PM, a project manager that would manage all of the supplies coming into their job site. And then, you know, I was pretty good at that because I'm fairly detail oriented.
Hmm.
Um, then I basically ran that division for them. The company I worked for acquired a competitor. They sent me down to culture that competitor, and I was 24 at the time, 26. And so I was sent down there to basically run a division with the previous owner who was 65, was a great man, had a ton of experience. And so, anyways, I was sent there down to do that. And then when I came here, there was a guy that basically wore too many hats. And my father in law said, I want you to take the operations hat from him ultimately so that it just creates a little bit more room for him. And then they wanted to grow the business. And so they needed some help just operationally getting efficient, trying to find all the different ways that we can skin that cat. Because in manufacturing, it's about saving pennies. You're not saving dollars. You're just saving enough pennies that hopefully it
Hmm.
ends up to a dollar.
Bean
And
counting.
being counting, exactly. And so that's what I did. And so, anyways, I progressed pretty quickly. Um, and so I took a big, executive role. I was, 30 at the time, going into a big executive role. And that's that pressure of performing and taking on new business because it was so much pressure. Back then, we weren't doing for that many people, but we were trying to grow the business. And, I had never faced some of these challenges before. And I was trying to raise a family. My wife was pregnant at the time. And I was like, man, it was just overwhelming. I felt the pressure. My father-in-law and my brother-in-law weren't putting any pressure on me. Like they were just like, "Hey, we're not doing well. We need to keep going. We need to make some changes." And so I felt that pressure. And I remember sitting in church one day, like I had just, man, things were not going well. And we went to church, came home. I was exhausted, and I just remember in church, like my heart was like beating out of my chest. Um, And then I get home. My wife is 8 months pregnant at the time. And I mean, I just, quite frankly, just black out. Like in the bedroom, I think I'm having a heart attack. Like I'm on the floor. My wife's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "This is not good." And I'm sitting there on our bedroom floor, and I'm just kind of in a daze, like half in, half out, passing out. And so my wife like gets me up, gets me in the car, go to the hospital. And it's funny, we go into the ER and they're like, labor and delivery is that way. They think it's for her, and she's like, no, it's for him. And as soon as she says like chest pain, like they're
Yeah.
like, oh man, heart attack.
Pull out the EKG.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
mean they're wheeling me
Yeah.
in, they're hooking me up. Um, my heart rate, I forget what my blood pressure was. My heart rate was off the charts. They're pumping me full of meds to try and just do something. And so, anyways, not a heart attack, but full on panic attack, all sorts of stuff. And so something had to give.
Yeah.
I gotta do something here. And so just went to our doctor, and he's like, I think you've got some anxiety problems, and we're gonna put you on some medications. Because previous to that, I was like, I'd just go home and I'd have a bourbon, calm me down. Then one bourbon became two, two became three. And that's kind of how I started nursing that pain.
Yeah. Self medicating.
Is it milk? Yeah, exactly. And then obviously that caused a whole host of issues with stomach, and so then antacids came on, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. It's a
Um,
domino effect.
yeah, so it was a bunch of self medication, and so then I get on Xanax and a couple other things to help me with the anxiety. Because I would wake up and I would sit in the shower and I would shake. I mean, literally just shake because I was so anxious for the day. Um,
Was there any place that was like a place of peace or calm that you had that you could escape to?
no, I mean it was, and most of it was because it was internal. I can't get away from my own mind.
Yeah,
I couldn't unplug. Uh,
yeah.
I was
Like,
always, like the golf course was a good place for me.
hmm
But I
Like
was,
like for me, like when I hit that point of, I guess it's like a point of zero responsibility. Like at the end of the day, when I
mm,
like I know that I'm not like say feeling guilty about like not accomplishing something, but I can't accomplish anything because at the end of the day,
right.
I'll feel a level of peace then.
Yeah.
But during the day, you can if you're not working, I will feel guilty about
Yeah.
I'm not getting something done.
Yeah. Yeah. And because there was, our factories were running 24/7, there was always something to be done.
Yeah.
And I was either getting calls or having to go in. Um, I'd get calls at 2 a.m. in the morning and have to get up and go. And so
So it just never stopped.
it just never stopped. And then I was like, oh gosh, like, and we were launching a huge new software system at the company. It was basically taking an old 1980s software that was home built and putting in a whole new Microsoft system across the company, manufacturing everything. And that was my baby. Um, and so, I mean, it was massive. Lots of money invested in it. Um, and yeah, it was a lot. But anyways, so yeah, that's kind of where that started. And I started getting on medication, and it helped. But man, I was like a freaking zombie. Um, like I remember taking our son was born at that point, and we took him to the Palestine. The I forget what it's called, the whatever, the Polar Express. Like they do the Polar Express like a real train ride, and
Okay.
they reenact the Polar Express. And so I was on medication, and I remember we were done. My wife asked me like, "Do you remember any today?" I was like, "Don't remember a thing." And that was a really hard thing to swallow. I was like, "Man, I've missed an experience with my son." Um, and so I was like, "Man, there's like," and I was my sister had struggled with mental health, and my dad does now, and but is does counseling and has made a lot of great progress, and so has my sister. So then I was like, man, this is just another thing I'm just going to deal with the rest of my life. So I was like, I'm just going to be on anxiety. I was you know resolving myself. This is the rest of my life,
Hmm.
and my wife even talked about like she was getting ready like that. She's going to have to carry the load, raise our son, and my husband's just going to have to survive. And that was it. It was a really difficult time, and then so all that happens, and we had just gotten introduced to Garth, and like he had a friend named Michael Miller, um, that came in, and we gotten to see some miraculous healings, and hear some of his stories. And we had just started to kind of hear the Lord's voice for ourselves, and where we were interacting with Him more often. And so I'd gone to sleep one night like I typically did early, and my wife felt compelled. The Lord told her, "Go pray while Josh is sleeping that he would be healed." And that night, all I can recall is that I had a dream where it's just a black kind of void, but I heard this voice saying, "Josh, you were not meant for this. Now get up and walk." That's all that it was said. And then I get up the next morning, and I notice I'm not shaking, and that was wild for me. And my first thing, I would go in and go get my pills and take my pills for anxiety so that I would calm down. And I went to grab my pill bottle just out of a habit, and that same voice said, "Josh, you don't need your pills today." I was like, "Okay," because I still noticed I was not shaking, and I was like, "Okay, something's going on here." And then that same voice said, "I want you to throw your pills away." And I'm like, "But what if this is not real and I won't have the pills?" And then he said, "Don't fear, I'm with you." And so I throw them away, and I go through the entire workday, and it was probably one of the most stressful work days I'd ever been through in a long time. Things were not going wrong, but never once did I shake or anything like that. And so I go home during lunch, and I said, "Emily, I didn't have to get my pills today," and she just started weeping. And then she told me that she prayed for me last night, and I was like, "This is wild." Um, yeah, I still get kind of just like choked up a little bit
Yeah.
talking about it now. Um,
Well, I can't imagine the stress load on her.
Yeah, I mean, she was, it was two at the time, and so I mean, that's like when the first time, like for me, the Lord intervened on my behalf, like crazy. Like, and I have like physical evidence that, like, and even today, like, I've had way more traumatic things happen from that time to now, or at least in my perspective, I have. Um, but I don't like that's like I haven't had a trouble with that. But like I said on Sunday, like the time that happened in 2 months, like those pressures came back. But during those 2 months, like I started going to men's prayer every morning and learning what it looked like to be dependent on the Lord. And, start like the thought life journey began. So like for me, I started learning we always hear voices. It's just what voice is it?
Mm.
And learning what was from the demonic, what was Holy Spirit, and then what was my flesh. And learning really that discipline and that tool to understand where those voices were. And having to go through some inner healing of where did it start? Uh, and had to there was some bitterness that I was holding against my father in law. I was like, you should have never put me in this position. But I was the one who asked it.
Mm.
He didn't do anything wrong. In fact, I was so stressed out, I had resigned. Like I was like after my healing, and then I started to walk later that year. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like I was like, I'm not going to waste my life doing this. And quite frankly, I wasn't performing. I wasn't ready for that position. Um, and so I told Buzz like the company needs somebody that can do the job. And so, and that was totally against my nature to
Mm.
give up and to admit that I couldn't do it. And so my father in law was gracious and said, I'm so sorry I put you in this position. But I had so much anger and bitterness towards him because I was blaming him for it. But he didn't do anything wrong. And so, but I was harboring that bitter and angerness. And I was always creating things in my mind that he was doing to me that he never did or hadn't even said to me.
So it was like surface level, not just like subconscious.
Yeah. I mean, it was nuts. And
Mm.
so when like it's funny because after that I went to a conference where I don't know if you know the name Sam Storms. So he wrote a book called Desiring the Spiritual Gifts. It was really a conference about that the gifts of the Spirit are for today. And so like he had Jack Deere, Sam Storms, Francis Chan was there, and they were, and even Matt Chandler went his journey with spiritual gifts. And so and Michael Miller was there, and it was funny. Like 2 days before I went to the conference, I had this dream because I was still having some physical manifestations of anxiety and just the stomach issues that you get from drinking that much alcohol all the time. And so I had this dream that Jack Deere was going to say somebody up here is having stomach issues, and I think they should be healed. Um, and then that happened at that conference. I mean, literally, Jack Deere looks like towards me in the stands said, "If you have stomach issues, I feel like it's somewhere right there, looking at me. Um, if you would stand up." Guess who didn't stand up?
Mm.
Me. I was like, "Nah, no way." And so, anyways, Michael Miller was at that conference too, and I went down to him and repented. He looked at me, he's like, "I don't think this is your source. Are you like, are you bitter against your father?" He didn't know anything, and just called it right out at me, and I was like, huh, "Yeah." And so he walked me through inner healing and repentance, and I mean, all the stomach symptoms went away, like instantly. And so like in that was like on top of my being healed from anxiety and learning how to deal with those things, um, and then getting healed from that, I was like, okay, I'm sold. Like I'll do whatever you want me to do. um, and so that's really kind of my journey with anxiety. And I still, like I said on Sunday, those feelings don't go away.
Hmm.
Those pressures don't go away because the enemy knows there's a wound, or it's got a scar. He's
Yeah.
always going to try and
Well,
scratch
that's what
that.
trauma means is open wound.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's just been kind of my journey with anxiety. Um, but it's been really what I talked about on Sunday. It's the dependence on the Lord that allows you to overcome those things. And everybody's dependence on the Lord looks different.
Hmm.
For me, it's tools and mental exercises. Like I write in my journal every morning. And it's more of getting things out of my head so that I can see them for what they are. It's kind of like the verse, like, darkness cannot exist in the light. So evil cannot exist when you put it in the light. And
Mm.
so it's really getting all of those thoughts in my perception in the light, in the journal, and then allowing me to view my thoughts as they are, like holding them bare before the Lord, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Um, and then really deciphering of those thoughts, like, hey, I need to let go of that one. I need to repent of that one. That one's interesting. I need to dig into that one a little bit. Or the Lord may just highlight some of those thoughts for me, or He'll tell me what to do with them. So that's just kind of like the tool that I use daily that really helps keep some of those things at bay,
Mm.
or at least puts them in their rightful place.
Yeah, well, it takes them out of your mind and puts them on
Yeah,
paper, puts them in the physical world. So,
yeah.
so during this like process of, I mean, the anxiety and all that, like, did you ever doubt your faith, or did you ever doubt God? Question those things before you became more of a physical, like you said, physical or spiritual Christian.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there was. I had not like I had read the Bible and I'd read these things that He healed the sick, cast out demons, all these things, but I didn't see that in everyday life. So I was like, you know, but I'm supposed to do the right thing, but that was purely of if I do the right thing, I will receive the praise of man. Like it even in scripture it talks about that in Proverbs, like, if you walk in righteousness, you will, honor the Lord, you will see be in the good side of man and God. Like it talks about that. But I was just focused on the man part of it. That's just what you did to get ahead in the world. Um, like if you did that, like, and I was seeing that success in my life. So everything was on me. Um, and so, but so God was kind of just the afterthought. Like we didn't go to church every Sunday. That wasn't an active part of our life. We did it so that like our parents wouldn't get
Mm.
not mad, but like they didn't really care. They did, but they didn't. They were going to micromanage us. But we did it like, this is the right thing to do. I should put my family in church. Like I want to be looked like I'm a reasonable and a good man. And that's what I grew up. My dad did that, right? And so that's what you did as a Southern man. You put your kids in church, or you
Hmm.
put your family in church. That's the right thing to do.
Well, at least just for morals and values.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was purely that. And so, but like that was like, and I would say like at that point, like I didn't believe God did anything. Um, I know I'm going to heaven, and that was good enough for me. I was like, but ultimately, I hadn't experienced a lot of hardship yet, and that's when I was like, okay, God, you saying you're in control, and I've gone through 3 reconstructive surgeries at this point. So, what's the deal here? Like, I'm doing everything right, so throw me a bone here. And that was kind of my attitude a little bit.
Mm.
Like, I'm doing everything right, but I've gone through this first surgery didn't work, second surgery didn't work, and now I'm at surgery 3 or surgery 2 at that point. I'm like, surely something help me out here. And I think that's why in this kindness, he's like, okay, I'll do something for you, and we'll see what you do. Um, and it's not, I don't think the Lord puts pain on us. Like that's not a view of how I view the Father, like where He puts us in pain, but He uses circumstances to say, okay, for your good,
Hmm.
I'm gonna see what you do here.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Book of Judges,
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
like he definitely he chastises those who he loves.
yeah, yeah. Like He disciplines those He loves. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. The intention is not to cause us pain,
right.
but
Yeah,
it's to bring us into the right path and alignment with Him.
sure, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was yeah, that was kind of my view. Like I had this kind of distorted view. I'm like, well, if you control everything, like why am I experiencing all this pain? When I'm doing everything right. That was kind of my view. So it's an interesting thing, but I've
Mm.
obviously worked through that.
Yeah. So, at what point did you start taking up like teaching and doing classes and stuff?
Um, since we were involved with Mosaic from the very beginning, when we started the church, you know, myself and really Garth, we were kind of just, I don't know if we were just kind of known for, we've been walking in it for a little bit, walking in the spiritual gifts. And really, I hadn't done a whole lot of it. It's just because I was really associated with Garth. And so I was just guilty by association, really. um, and so, but anyways, and so we started leading a small group at our home. And so we had, a group of 30 or 40 people in our home every week for the first 4 years. And so I was in charge of that community group. And because of my experience, I was super passionate about teaching people how to hear the Lord's voice because it fundamentally changed my life. Um, and I was really passionate about praying for the sick. Um, because that was so impactful for my life. That's when the Lord, like, I had a physical manifestation. And I still am very passionate about praying for the sick because for some people, it's the first time, like, you need that jarring experience. Like, you get to say, like, either he's real and he cares about me enough to break his supernatural order or break the natural order of the world, or that was just pure coincidence. It's kind of like the Lord giving us a kindness, like, I'm giving you the easiest choice. Either you have to recognize he did this or not. And so that's what I was super passionate about. And that's what we did in our community group. We ultimately taught people how to hear the Lord's voice for themselves. And then we prayed for the sick. When people would come in with ailments, we would literally practice that. And I was teaching people how to pray for the sick. In all of my experience, which I
Hmm.
didn't really have a whole lot at that point, but I'd had some experience with people that had gone all over the world and have been praying for the sick. Um, and so that's what I was passionate about. And my wife was great to go along with it. And she's great. She is super wise. And so that's what we did. That's how we started. Um, and then over the years, just, I think as you're willing to sacrifice parts of yourself and you just get put in public places. And I got to teach a couple of times, and for some reason, people liked what I said. Um,
That's always nice.
yeah, it's always nice, right? Um, they just, I just kept on being asked. And so, like, we've, even this year, like, we taught our marriage class. We got asked to teach a marriage class. And so we did that for 6 weeks. And then I got asked to preach this Sunday. And so we used to teach a lot more than we do now. Just because I think just because we had been involved with the church for so long,
Hmm.
and we weren't in general, like, we were fairly stable people. So I don't think it's anything that we have this incredible view of anything or like we're creating incredible content but I think just we've been a stable, steady presence for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, and we truly have learned how to rely on the Lord for everything. What's funny is like the content that you guys heard on Sunday, over 85% is actually from my wife.
Okay.
Like, oftentimes, like, I'm not great at creating content, but when she hears something, like the things that the Lord tells her is just incredible. Like her perspective that he downloads for her is amazing. And so a lot of that content is what, like, I asked her, like, here's the text that I'm going to be grappling with. Here's where I think the Lord wants to do this. Here's what I think He's trying to tell our people, um, as a part of. Here's what it looks like to obey Christ or grow in Christ was the theme. Here's the text that really Terrell had asked me to kind of grapple with and teach. And I was like, I think he wants to do this. What do you think? And I would sit that with Emily, and she said, she looked at my first round of notes. She's like, okay. And then 2 hours later, she comes back with like 3 pages of content,
Hmm.
just pure download. And I was like, okay. Because Emily doesn't like to speak in public at all.
Okay.
She hates that.
But she does the teaching classes with you and stuff.
Yeah, she does. And like she recognizes that's a way she can be faithful in the Lord to provide that for her,
Hmm.
and submit to that. And public speaking doesn't bother me. Um, and so most of the time, like Sunday, she created a lot of that content, And my job was just to piece it together and make it logical enough to where you can teach it and people can follow.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's really interesting. And so we're a really good team. And so like even the marriage class, like she created a lot of the content. I'm not kidding. Like she's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And a lot of people don't know that about her, but like she is incredibly intelligent. And she wouldn't portray herself like that by any means. She would much rather be in the background, because she's been in the limelight for most of her life.
Mm.
She would much rather be in the background, but she's wildly intelligent. And so I have just the most deep respect for her. Um, just because I mean, we've been through a lot together. The reason we have one kid is because she's had three miscarriages.
Mm.
And so that's been another part of our story. So in the midst of all the healings that I've seen, but yet we've had three miscarriages.
Mm.
Um, and we tried to do foster to adopt, and that fell through. And so that's another part of our story that impacts the way we do ministry, the way we do life, is we have that pain and that experience where we see healing and then we don't see healing. But why?
Mm.
Right? And so that's why we have the one that we do, and I'm super grateful for, because most of the doctors told me because of all of my surgeries, um, it was quite frankly a miracle that we had one.
Wow.
Um, and so that was like I call him my miracle son. And I mean, it's just I'm grateful every day that I just have one. And so it's a very cherishable. Like I cherish that moment because I know it's a gift from the Lord. Because I didn't I wasn't always crazy about kids. Like I didn't really know if I wanted to have kids. I did it because that's what you're supposed to do, right? And so we
I mean, I would agree. You are supposed to.
yeah, and I would agree too. I think that's what you're supposed to do.
But like, if when you come in with that motivation, like, yeah, you can screw them up pretty easily too.
Right, exactly. So yeah, that's and she has been so faithful to the Lord through all of that. And she gets to she's writing some content for the church for people that have kind of I think it's what do they call it, waiting in hope is the ministry they're working on for women that have walked through miscarriages and how do you remain faithful
Mm.
through all of those things, because for Emily, a lot of women they have a lot of miscarriages and they have breakthrough. We've seen that at our church a lot. But
I mean, we had three.
oh wow, yeah,
There were some rough moments there
for
because
sure.
we always like I always came in wanting like a number of kids, like 5 to 7,
Okay,
and she was like, five, we'll see, which
yeah,
is where we're at now.
okay, yeah,
So we're like, we'll take one at a time. But yes, definitely like healing there overcame that.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, and that's I'm super grateful for y'all. And I think that was one of the hard things for Emily. Like she's been around and gotten to pray for a lot of people that they've had a miscarriage, then they have breakthrough.
mm,
But for me and Emily, it just never happened. And so having to deal with knowing a God that does these things, like that heals the sick, and we ultimately want to, but then not seeing breakthrough in those areas,
yeah,
and that I think, but it's been a healing thing for Emily, because she has just moments of like where she can go back and say the Lord is with me, and he's been very faithful to her,
hmm,
because she's gotten experience to see people walk in healing, and so that is a gift to her, the way she views it.
yeah.
Yeah.
How much time do you have?
I'm doing pretty good. It's only 7:30, so like 15 more minutes.
15 more minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you and Emily meet?
So we met at college. We both went to Baylor University. So we met freshman year, and we were just good friends. And then I dated another person. She had a long-term high school boyfriend that she was still dating, and then went to the military, or he went to the military. And then, so we were friends for 3 years, and I dated a girl that I thought I was going to marry, and that didn't work out. And then we started dating junior year in college, and then, you know, um, it was kind of funny. Like we were exact opposites. Like the girl I dated in college was the typical what I would call the church girl, like very nice, Um, didn't say a whole lot. Whatever I said kind of went. She's like, "That sounds great,"
Mm.
um, and was fine. And I thought that's what I kind of wanted in a wife. But then Emily was she was passionate. She spoke her mind. Um, she did not back down. She was competitive. And I found that wildly attractive. And I was like, it was completely opposite of my personality at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And I was like, man, something's compelling there. And I actually tried to date her roommate before her. She reminds me of that all the time. Um, and every time we get into a marriage class, she always reminds everybody that she was the second choice. And I was like, thank you so much for
The refined choice.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, I didn't, I always tell her, like, the Holy Spirit just opened my eyes to you, and that's
Yeah.
what it took. Um, but so we met in college, and so we dated for 2 years, got engaged our senior year, and then we got married like October after we graduated. So yeah, that's where we met. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
been married 17 years now.
Awesome.
Yeah, kind of.
And people say that men don't like strong women.
Oh yeah, it's kind of funny. I prefer it.
Well,
Well,
I think the definition of what a strong woman is very screwed up.
oh yeah,
Because like, acting like a man, aggressive, bullying, like,
yeah.
oh, that's what a strong woman is. It's like, no, that's not what a strong woman is.
No, not at all.
Just like with a strong man, it's not a strong man. It's confidence. It's
Mhm.
willingness to speak your mind.
Yep.
It's knowing when you're right and knowing when you're wrong.
Yep. Like
Um,
she's very confident in who she is. Like like obviously my job is to care for her, but my I always tell people like my job is to create an environment for Emily to thrive.
mhm.
Not for me. It's not my responsibility for her to thrive. It's just to create an environment when she can thrive. And that for her, it's to give her space because I mean she is very confident, and when she sees something that either needs to be fixed or she wants, she goes and gets it. Like, watch out, she's gonna get it done.
Yeah,
So it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think we went over like your kind of your calling. Your,
yeah,
I mean, what would you say your calling is? We kind of touched on things with the teaching and classes, and
sure. If I had to say, kind of like in general, what my calling was is to teach people how to break free of things but sustain it. Because kind of like I talked about on Sunday, is a lot of us get to break through, but it's the day in day out discipline that requires you to sustain that breakthrough, and not fall back into whether it's addiction
yeah,
or whatever that is your thing might be. And that's like, over the years as I've met with people, discipled people, like I always lean back on that. um, I can see where their issues are. I'm like, man, you've got a dependence issue. Like, you're trying to do something the same way. And like even Einstein would say, if you do the same thing, expect a different outcome, that's the definition of insanity,
yeah,
right? And I use that with people a lot. Like, if you keep on doing the same thing, it won't get better, right? So I feel like that's kind of what my calling is to teach people how to do that. Because anytime I meet with somebody, that's always where I land. Um, doesn't matter who it is, that's always the thing that I see. I'm like, okay, if you can do this, here's the thing that you're always doing. So change that and be amazed that you might have a different outcome.
hmm
But it's out of dependence on the Lord. If you do it out of your own strength, man, you're screwed. Because that's our nature as men to say, well, I'm just going to do, instead of, hey, stop. Lord, what do you want me to do with this?
yeah,
It's kind of that active submission of, okay, out of dependence, I'm going to do this thing,
yeah.
and do it differently. So that's kind of what my calling is, or I feel like it is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in.
Oh, man. Thanks for doing it early in the morning, kind of adhering to my schedule.
No
And
problem. No problem.
yeah, and your setup is
It's a good
freaking
conversation.
awesome.
Well, thank you. We'll try to use it more. It's a permanent setup
It's permanent. That's awesome.
until we get kicked out.
I don't think you will.
Yeah.
So, but thanks again. I really appreciate it. It was fun getting to talk, and I feel like I did most of the talking. So,
Well, that's kind of the idea.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. I was like, I feel like I talked a lot.
No,
So,
so. All right. Well, thank you.
well, good deal.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. See ya.
See ya.